right, just a few more things and we'll be finishing up this lesson. Let me move myself over here out of the way. Let's look at a couple of more examples. Now, oftentimes you will end up needing to play multiple notes simultaneously. So in this case, these are representing what we call half notes. So these will be held for 2 of the 4 beats of the measure. In this case, what I'm simply doing is playing the basic triad of the chord of C. So early on in this course, when you learn to play the C chord, what you were playing is the C, you skipped a note and played the E, skipped a note and played the G. This is the basic triad for the C chord, and this is simply what it would look like on sheet music. Now at the same time, in the bass clef, you're playing the same 3 notes in a slightly different configuration. So this is what we would call inversion 2, because C is in between the E and the G instead of the C being on the bottom. But most of the time when you're playing, you'll be playing these chords with both hands simultaneously. So you press all 6 notes down at once and hold them, in this case, for 2 beats, which would make up 2 beats of the measure. Now again, in some cases, you'll simply see a quarter note. It is a black filled in note, so that takes 1 of the 4 beats of the measure. In this case, you've got a flag going across the top, so that means that those are 8th notes. So these notes would be played twice for every count. So it'd be bump, 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 bump. Every time you're clapping for a beat of the measure, that note is played twice. Da, 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 da. So it would be played 2 times for every beat in the measure. All right, let's look at one more thing before we move on, and that's going to be the addition of this little dot added to the notes. So this is simply called a dotted note. So what a dot does is it takes the value of the note that it normally has without the dot. In this case, this is a half note. So it takes the value it normally is and adds half of that value back to itself. So in this case, since this note normally would get 2 beats, but now we have a dot added to it, half of 2 is 1, so we add half the value to itself, which means this note really gets 3 beats instead of 2 because it's a dotted half note. Again, the formula is it takes the value it normally is without the dot and adds half of that value back to itself. So if it's a dotted half note, you take the 2 beats it normally gets, add half of that to itself, which means a total of 3 beats of the measure that this note would take up. Now, if this were a dotted quarter note, that means the quarter note normally gets 1 beat of a 4-beat measure, right? So quarter note has 1 beat. If it's a dotted quarter note, it takes half the value of what it normally gets and adds that to itself. So half of 1 is a half. So a dotted quarter note would get 1.5 beats. So basically what it boils down to is that dot simply means you're holding that note a little bit longer than normal. The exact duration of that little bit longer simply means the value of the note that it's applied to, adding half of that value to itself, and that tells you how long to hold the note. So for example, if it was an 8th note and it's a dotted 8th note, you would take an 8th plus a 16th, and that would be the duration of a dotted 8th note. If it was a dotted 16th note, you would take a 16th of a beat plus add a 30 seconds to that 16th, and that would be the length of a dotted 16th note. Again, it's always the value of what it normally is without the dot plus half of its own value added back to itself, and that's the duration of a dotted note. All right, so let's look at some sheet music here. This is an old favorite of mine, of You've Got a Friend in Me from the Toy Story, and what we see here are some basic notes. This is all treble clef, so it's all going to be right hand, so you could use this to kind of tinker out the notes. But what I want to focus on in this little portion of the video is the timing of how long these notes would be held. So you're going to learn many times that the way you sing a song isn't always the way the song is written. That's what I have found with this song. I sing this kind of differently than the way it's actually written. So we're going to focus at what's on the paper, and we're going to count out the timing to see when these notes would be played. So what we see here are a bunch of quarter notes and some 8th notes. We don't see any half notes or whole notes here. These are all quarter and 8th notes. The reason we can tell that is all the black notes with the staff going up by itself without a flag, that is a quarter note. The one with the bars, in this case, hooking these 2 notes together means that these are both 8th notes. They have 1 flag, therefore they are 8th notes. If they had 2 flags, that means it would be 16th notes. The 2 flags means that the timing is cut in half, but in this case there's just 1 flag, so instead of it being a quarter, these are eighth notes. So the timing of this would be on the downbeat of the first measure, you would have 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, can you go ahead and predict which notes fall on the downbeats? We have 1, 2, 3, 4. That's our timing of the song. So let's see if we can figure out when the notes will be played according to the downbeat. So if the timing of this song were 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, what notes would be played on the downbeat of that pattern? So you've would be on the first downbeat, got would be on the next downbeat, friend would be on the third downbeat, and in would be on the fourth downbeat. So the E note in there is going to be on an upbeat, as we call it. So it's you've got a friend in me. So every downbeat is when you would play the quarter note. So it's you've got a friend in me. So that's the timing of that. So as we look at the timing, the downbeat, that's beat 1. Beat 2 would be the G. The E is on the upbeat because it's half a beat, right? It's on the upswing of that beat, as some people call it. A gets the downbeat for beat 3. G gets the downbeat for beat 4. E then gets the first downbeat of the next measure. Since we ran out of beats, because this is 4/4 timing, we see right there, 1, 2, 3, 4. It means we start over again with our counting in the new measure. Now, we haven't talked about these symbols yet. These are simply rest symbols. So this little squiggly line here is considered a 1 rest beat. So it's like a quarter note, but it's a rest beat is what we would call it. So when you see that little squiggly line by itself, it means that is worth 1 beat of the 4 beats of the measure. When you see this little rectangle over here, that's like a half note basically, but it's a rest symbol. That means it gets 2 beats. Okay, so there's where the other 3 beats come in for the measure. So you play me on the downbeat, rest, 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 and then start on the next measure with you've on the downbeat of 1 again as you're going through the third measure in this case. So you've got a friend in me. Again, rest, rest, rest. When the road looks rough ahead, and your is on the downbeat. And then this measure gets a little tricky in that you've got a couple of eighth notes here. So the downbeats are going to be on miles and miles, your. So this A, which the notes simply kind of slur down from the C to the G, that's on the upbeat. And then the word from is on the upbeat. So it would be miles and miles from your. Your would be beat 4. Nice, warm bed. The 4th beat is a rest there. So it's a little tricky reading sheet music. And I honestly prefer simply playing by number and just playing by feeling the music and just kind of playing it how you want to play it. But if you're ever going to get into a concert pianist type thing and reading music, you're going to have to really work on doing the timing of the music and getting everything timed right with the right hand and the left hand and coordinating it to where it fits sheet music, especially if you're playing with other instrumentalists who are also reading sheet music like in a band setting. So reading sheet music can get pretty difficult and pretty tough, and there are some pieces out there that get super duper complex like this one here. You see all kinds of crazy stuff going on, but I would begin with something very basic, just something like this, and I'll post some of these on this same web page these videos are posted on, so you can have access to at least a few things that you can practice with. These are nice in that they give you the name of the note within the note itself. And this is for beginners right here, so not all sheet music is going to give you that, but this is a good place to start. So I would recommend taking a few of these examples I'm giving you to work with, or finding some on your own, and just trying to work on the timing of reading the sheet music and where the notes are going and how long to hold each note. And the more time you spend focused on playing the notes and holding the notes the right timing and duration, And the more exposure you get to all of that, the easier it's going to be to open up a hymn book or open up a piece of sheet music and be able to sit down and look at it and kind of analyze where it's going, how it's structured. And before long, you'll be playing all kinds of sheet music just by focusing on these basic techniques.